And I think it's on. Oh. Good evening, friends. Shavua Tov, a good week. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. I'm Amichai at home in Harlem, in New York. It's good to be back and see many of you. Thank you for joining us. If you're just joining us now, we're going to be spending some time together, hopefully in open hearts. And we're just going to take another minute or so as we gather to really ground ourselves on this night. During this very complicated moment. So I want to invite you to do what you can to ground yourself right now, to be less distracted if possible. Close a door, turn off a digital device you don't need. If you're sitting home alone or with others, I'm going to invite you to light a candle in a moment if you have one. If not, I have one here that I'm going to light with and for many of us. And as we begin this very last minute planned event, I'm glad that many of you are here. Don't know else what you're going to do on the Saturday night, but this is the fourth Saturday night since the world changed. And so it feels very important and meaningful to come together, even on Zoom. Hold the space. Hold each other. So as we gather with different questions, different realities, different backgrounds, I want to say that tonight, the date today is November 4th. On this date in 1995, Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister, was assassinated. And the last song he sang was the one we just heard, Shir LaShalom, a song, a prayer for peace. I'll talk more about Rabin in a moment. But before that, I want to invite us to breathe, take a couple breaths together. We breathe in anyway, but breathe with intentionality. Fill your lungs with presence. Feel the air come in and out. Feel the fear, the terror that has been gripping us, ancient and new. And feel the feelings. Some of the feelings we don't really have words for, but some we do. And I want to invite us as we start to maybe put in the chat, what feelings are you feeling right now? What's one feeling that's really resonant for you? You don't have to, of course, you can just feel it. Name it to yourself, but maybe we share, like, what are we coming with on this night? Well, just take a moment to feel what you're feeling. There's no such thing as a wrong feeling in this space, this brave space that we're creating together to process and to be. I'm going to take a moment for that as we're sharing our sorrow and our sadness, disappointment, little sorrow, grief, confusion, disbelief, commitment, heartbreak, anxiety, disenfranchised, grief, trauma, fragility, anger, confusion, deep sadness, anger, bewilderment, sickness, and love, horror. Just witness the ones you're hearing and the ones you're noticing. Connection and disconnection, despondency, void, isolation, all real. Keep breathing. Keep sharing. We're really here to hold each other, to meet each other. Even with numbness, the notion of scared and sacred. Thank you, Cherie. Weariness, the weight of it all. Ignorance and the despair, the unknowing. So as these are coming in, we're going to, in a moment, light a candle. It is this end of Shabbat. In the Jewish tradition, we light a Havdalah candle. Havdalah separates one state of being from another, one day from one night, the Sabbath from the week. And we are lighting a candle for all the souls of all the innocents. One of the things that I noticed while in Israel this past week, seems like a year ago already, is that you cannot get yahrzeit candles in any of the stores. Memorial candles are sold out. Judaica stores are also pretty much out of prayer books and mezuzahs. And they're soon going to be running out of guns. So just tells you a little bit about where we are. So if you've got a candle, whether it's a Havdalah candle, a memorial candle, any kind of candle, you are invited to light it. And I'm going to ask us, as we beautifully put the feelings that we are sharing right now in the chat, and I hope we're holding it, including the, thank you, Lynn, the happiness that we are together, that we're making the time. Some of us know each other, some of us don't, to come together, to hold each other's energy together. Zoom can do that. We can do that. I'm going to invite us to put in the chat, perhaps, what's an intention you have for this candle we're lighting tonight? Memorial candle, a demarcation candle, a transition candle, a soul candle. I'm lighting it for the soul of Yitzhak Rabin, all the victims of violence and terror, all the innocent and pure souls who just want to be held tonight. That's my kavanah for Shavua Tov, for a better week. And we have intentions in the chat to bring light to the darkness, to the hostages, to the light of peace, to whatever it is, and hope, to understand, to keep the faith, to reconcile conflicting feelings, glimmers of hope, live with love, all Jews throughout history, battery power taper, totally fine, innocent children, all who are afraid. I know you're reading the chat with me, this scroll of intentions, innocent, the light holders, the end of hatred, Jews of all, struggling with hopelessness, these flames light. Thank you for holding the candles with me, friends. It takes one drop of poison to poison a well. It takes one little candle to light up a room. We're witnesses of both. There is despair, and there can be repair. So if you're just joining us, we are lighting a candle with intentions. We're keeping breathing to hold us here. And how many participants? I'm going to ask you to stay muted if you can for now. We're recording this for others who couldn't be here tonight. And I'm going to open it up in about maybe 20, 30 minutes for some questions so we can talk a little bit about what we're feeling and whatever I can be helpful with. I want to thank Taylor for coming in last minute to help hold our digital space, and the Lab Shul team for providing so much support to so many people at this time, so many different ways. So we're lighting candles, and we're here now. I want to take a few moments and talk about November 4th, 1995, and how it's connected to tonight, to this moment right now. November 4th, 1995, some of you have heard me tell the story, and I've written it. I was a young peace activist and teacher in Jerusalem in my 20s. We were at a peace vigil over Shabbat outside Jerusalem, and as Shabbat ended, we did have the line lit candles. There were rumors that in the peace rally in Tel Aviv, there were gunshots. And everybody sang, Refuah Shlema, let there be healing. We got into the car to drive back to Jerusalem, and within seconds, heard the radio newscaster say he was the general of peace. I said, stop the car. They shot Rabin. That was the night many of us remember where the Prime Minister of Israel was assassinated by a right-wing settler, religious Jew, who said to the radio as soon as he was apprehended, I did what God told me to do. And I remember sitting on my roof in Jerusalem where there were a river of candles already lit in the streets, and the shock and the horror. And I thought to myself, this was the binding sacrifice of Yitzchak, of Isaac. And I thought to myself, in the Torah, there's a story about Isaac being bound by his father Abraham and almost sacrificed. There's a story about almost the sacrifice of Yitzchak, of Isaac. And that morning in synagogue, on November 4th, 95, that was a story read in synagogues, as it was this morning at a synagogue near you. And I thought to myself, I'm witnessing the sequel. When Abraham had a voice in his head that said, sacrifice Isaac for the sake of the land, of God, of the promise, Abraham didn't hesitate. He almost sacrificed his son, Yitzchak. He didn't. It was interrupted. But it took thousands of years later for that story to become reality, because what Yigal Amir did was he heard a voice that said, for the sake of the land, you got to kill Yitzchak. And the sacrifice of Isaac took on a sinister sequel, and Yitzchak was killed. And what my thought that night on the roof, the Saturday night, was, oh my God, this story is alive. It's like Frankenstein. This is not a closed book. This Torah is alive. And if Yigal Amir, who grew up with the same background I grew up with, religious Zionist, he took it to this direction, that the land is more important than human life, that this depiction of our Jewish trajectory is worth fighting and defying peace, I have a responsibility to fight him. The stories we tell, which stories we tell, and how we tell them will feed and fuel our future. And if we keep telling fundamentalist stories and we keep going by fear and hatred and killing, that's going to be the future. Unless we talk back to the text in a different way. And that night, I really thought to myself, and in the days following, the stories we tell and how we tell them must change. And then Clinton spoke at Rabin's funeral and mentioned the binding of Yitzchak, the only person there to speak Torah on that day. And when we look back all these years later, 30 years later, that was a moment that ruptured the peace process, that ruptured Israeli society, world society, that has gotten us where we are now. Bibi became prime minister a year later. I remember that night too. We went to sleep thinking that Peres won. So relieved. And woke up to Bibi. 96. And a year later, I came to New York thinking this is not going to be good. And I was curious about y'all. What does American Jewry look like? Is there more chance of us telling new stories a little bit away from so close to that ancient well? So I want to say, and this is not the main thing of tonight, I want to share some of my stories from these 2 weeks in Israel and just a sliver of what's going on as a way to witness and echo this moment that, as many of you know, I recognize many of your faces. What became storytelling and then Lab Shul is one of the many ways to talk back to our tradition, to take the patriarchal binary narrative we inherited, full of trauma, full of pain, full of solutions that don't get us closer to where we want to be, and say we want to translate it differently. We want to transform the stories and the rituals, who our God is and what our truth is, so we're not in this place we are now. And that's a long trajectory, and these days only reinforce my understanding that the little I can do, not as a politician and not as an activist in those spheres, is help us find solace and soul in this moment and reactivate ourselves to telling different stories, change our trajectory. We're not cousins. We're the children of Abraham. We're siblings. And Jews and Muslims, Christians, Arabs, all of us, we have to tell a new story because this old one isn't serving us. And fundamentalists on both sides have hijacked it. Just how the sacred story echoes at this moment, and this might sound ridiculous, but yes, this massacre happened on Simchat Torah, the day in which we celebrate our sacred story. It was Bereshit, the very beginning of the Torah, and the following week was Noah and the story of the flood. Hamas named this massacre the flood. And in the stories that follow us in the last few weeks, it's Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. And when Sarah is mad because Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, might inherit instead of Isaac, his secondborn, she says to Hagar, the surrogate mother, slave who became a mother in the Abrahamic household, my Hamas on you, my rage is on you. And Hagar and Ishmael are sent out. And in some ways, we've told the story on Rosh Hashanah so many years, the pain between our people, as we tell it, begins at that moment, that Hamas. What can we do about these stories? To take responsibility and accountability, to talk back to the toxicity and tell a different tale together. That too is part of what will happen in the days of rebuilding and reconstruction when we rise from the rubble that is yet untold. That's part of our responsibility. I want to say a word about numbers, about war by numbers. It is incomprehensible, but there still is no clarity of how many are actually captive. The number keeps changing. We don't exactly know how many were killed on October 7th and how many wounded might succumb from their wounds and how many are captive. Those numbers keep changing still. We have no idea how many are killed in Gaza right now, and they're not accurate numbers of how many are killed and wounded in the West Bank. Just comprehend that for a moment. Not that numbers matter, but so much of this comes down to some kind of way of trying to make sense of this evolving horror. I spent 2 weeks in Israel. I was supposed to stay a week. I attended 6 funerals. I sat at 5 Shiva homes. Those 6 funerals were for altogether 11 people. I ducked for cover under 7 sirens. And I sat at 3 peace circles between Palestinians and Israelis. I also ate untold numbers of bad falafel because there was simply no time to eat. So there were definitely highlights and beautiful moments of grace on this trip. Not only seeing my mother and family and relatives and friends who were so grateful that I was there and grateful for the solidarity of so many of us and just happy to hug in the middle of what is by far the worst moment in Israeli history and for many of us in Jewish reality as we speak. I want to share a few of those with you beyond the numbers. Some of the questions that have come up that are open-ended. I'm speaking for myself, Amichai. I'm not necessarily representing Shul. We have different opinions and thoughts and narratives, certainly not representing anybody but me at this point. And as one of the leading voices at Shul, I hope that you can hear me with an open heart, that I come with love and I come with pain and I come with a great deal of concern for where we are now and where we will be next. I also come with hope. This candle is lit. I refuse to let go of the privilege of hope, knowing that right now it's a little candle in the corner of the room, but it's there. We will get through this and rebuild better. But here's just a few stories. The day I arrived, literally the day I arrived, I was taken right from the airport to help at the headquarters in Jerusalem, where an unbelievable mobilization of civic infrastructure has replaced the collapsed government. And in case you don't know this, let me say this again. This is tragic. The Israeli government is not functioning. It wasn't functioning for many, many months before October 7th. It is not functioning now, and it was not there on October 7th. Time will come for the inquiries over Bibi's disastrous behavior, not just on this, but on every other front. This is not a political statement. I have been vocal in the protest against Bibi for many months for a lot of reasons. This is a voice shared by so many people across the political spectrum in Israel. This is a failed government based on, at best, amateur hires of people who were there for political hire, who completely dissolved major ministries and operations in Israel. That is part of what happened on October 7th, including the intelligence. It is an unbelievable crime. And so the immediately aftermath of October 7th, the sticker you're seeing here was immediately created the next day. I'm still here in Arabic and Hebrew, all over Jerusalem. We're still here, we're still here, we're still here. I took a lot of photos of posters and graffiti and thing. I'm going to share only a couple. I haven't had a chance to put together the album, but the civic infrastructure, I know you've read about it. It's incomprehensible. Anything and everything, from food to the 250,000 evacuated from south and now north, or in hotels, in homes, in rented apartments. Whatever the folks who were helping with relief at the beginning in the south, stuff for soldiers, from military gear to food to medical supplies to de-escalation teams that gathered immediately in East Jerusalem, in mixed cities, to make sure that there isn't violence, to media teams, to social media teams to try and explain what's going on, to the raising of millions and millions and millions of dollars, to working with the orphans from leftover from this massacre, etc., etc. An unbelievable mobilization. As soon as I arrived, I was taken to the headquarters in Jerusalem, which is the campus of the arts that was opened a few years ago. There's an entire store the size of like a huge gallery where people just bring clothes. And of the thousands of evacuated, you just came in, said what you wanted, and shopped in a way that felt like dignity and not charity. And that was my first thing within a couple of hours. And then I immediately headed to my mother's house to see her. And as soon as I arrived at my mother's house in Jerusalem, and we had an epic hug and a cry. And from the corner of my ear, I'm hearing, my sister was there watching television. We had a moment. And then I'm thinking, wait, what is this? Is this a siren on TV from before, from the news? And they're like, oh no, this is a siren right now. There hadn't been many in Jerusalem. And so my mom is 94. She's kind of fragile. I'm like, Ima, I think we have to go into the safe room right now. And there it was. We just went to the safe room. And as we walked there, we could hear the thud of a nearby. We didn't know if it's a hit or a intervention. It ended up being a hit about a mile away. And I posted a video that some of you may have seen just from the safe room. Like, what the? We just got here. And I want to say, and we'll get to the horrible reality everywhere. The missiles that are coming from south and from north are lethal and dangerous and have to be stopped. They're not the level of bombing in Gaza and the level of damage. But I don't know if any of you lived through a siren of a missile scare. And what's it like to know that whatever this thing is, it could kill you or destroy the house that you're in? And the fear with my mother that first day, with friends the next day, in Tel Aviv, in the south, on the road, in Jerusalem, how your ears begin to identify it in a survivalist way, and something in your body clenches, and you just go into this mode. And there are people in Tel Aviv and elsewhere who've been doing this every day for a month. And again, I know we're talking about people all over that region who, don't even have sirens or safe rooms. But only yesterday, I've been back in New York 2 days, and I was just walking through the city, and I thought, oh, it's probably not going to be a siren. And I felt like not my body relaxing exactly, but just like feeling how much I was feeling in my body of just this thing that clenched. And again, I was there for 2 weeks. So I just want to say something about the somatic, the embodied thing, whether you're watching this on TV or whether you're watching it on screens or whether you've watched the videos, you have close ones there, and where you don't, maybe this might be your proximity to it. There is a rippling of terror in our bodies. And we're in the middle of the trauma. All the PTSD will come. We're not on the P yet. Yeah. When I was in Tel Aviv the following week at a protest to bring back the captives with a few of Shul family members who are now living in Tel Aviv, including Lena, whose bar mitzvah I did. In the middle of standing there was suddenly a siren. There's nowhere to go. In the middle of the street, we huddled under a bunch of stairs. It's a TV crew that was with us. For those of you who know Rabbi Roli Matalon from BJ, this is his sister-in-law, Zichrini, who I just bumped into there. And we stood together holding signs of the captives and then ended up under this stairs. That's all we had. We heard a thud really nearby. And after 5 minutes, went back to the streets to hold back the captive posters. I can't even describe how surreal it is to you. And at the same time, my friend Noah, who's also an Israeli activist, peace activist, was back in Tel Aviv, was telling me she was standing at the exact same time at the other encampment for releasing the captives, where it's outside the library. And when the siren began, they all rushed into the safe room, which is inside the library. But it's got one of those metal things where it's one person at a time. And you got 1,000 people who want to get into the thing. And most of them just gave up. And then she said, okay. And then we just stood there with the signs. So there's like a surrealness to this moment that is just really hard to describe. I hope you're just getting just a bit of it for me. So there were the sirens, and there is this situation with the captives. Walking around in Israel those days, there isn't a day where you don't talk to somebody who knows somebody who met somebody who's mourning, who's in the hospital, who doesn't know where they are, who's abducted. Because I was in Israeli and Palestinian circles, there's the unspeakable of people who don't know how their loved ones are in Gaza or afraid to leave their homes in the West Bank. So really, the ripples are enormous. And with those ripples is also the violence of language and the increased call for revenge, which is why we're in this place in the first place, a month later, and the bombing hasn't stopped. I want to share one more story with you about this notion of revenge, this primal revenge. My second day there, as soon as I got in, I went to this headquarters and I signed on to the bereavement team of local rabbis, which means I was signed on to a team that went to Shiva houses, a team that went to funerals, and a team that sat with families of the captives. And all on WhatsApp. And it's basically who can go here, who can go there, who's the team that's going there, and it's around the clock. And so the second day I got there, I went to the last day of a Shiva in Jerusalem of a family that lost a soldier on October 7th, a young man. His name was Gavriel. And his mother was sitting Shiva, and his grandmother. And a very simple, very religious woman from North Africa of Moroccan origin. And the house is full of photos of rabbis and saints. And she's just sitting there weeping and telling stories about him and angry at her sister-in-law for things, all the stuff that happens at Shiva. And we sat with her for about an hour and a half just to listen, just to hold her hand. Don't know her. And then as I walked out, there was a death ad. So as many of you know, in Israel, there are these ads when someone dies. And this was on the door to their building. The Hebrew says the Israeli Defense Forces sadly announced the death of Sergeant Benjamin Yonah. Now you see why I circled in red? The print says Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory. But somebody added in script, Hey Yudalid, Hashem Yikom Damo. May God avenge his death. Now, may God avenge his death, Hashem Yikom Damo, is a very common thing, especially after Holocaust. It's used in some rhetoric, and it doesn't really mean I want to revenge his death. God will revenge his death. But somebody added that. And that sense of primal revenge is heard again and again. I know you've heard it. I know you've read it. When one of the heads of Hamas was interviewed yesterday, he was quoting some of the right-wing supremacists in the Israeli government and their language of revenge, and basically justifies why they are where they are and we are where we are. So this poor soldier I don't know where and what he stood for, but the sense of rage in response to the murderous and despicable October 7th massacre. I haven't watched the videos. I'm not going to watch the videos. I've successfully succeeded in not being sucked into this horrific stuff. A friend of mine who works in the Knesset was there last week when members of Knesset were shown in a classified screening what some of the news heads in New York were shown last week. The stuff that isn't being shown publicly, from body cams and from stuff that was posted. And my friend who said people walked out and threw up, like members of the Knesset, and were in tears. And like, he can't just, I don't know. And so I'm not justifying this in any way. I want to acknowledge that I understand the primal human level. I'll say one more thing about that, and one more story. Why, from the depths of ancientness, there's a call for revenge. And in response to Sarah's thing, it depends. I think the honorific of Hashem Yikom Damo is really to martyrs. It's people who died in the Holocaust or in a terror, like them, but never of Israeli soldiers. That's what's a little bit. It's a little different. So that too is one of the things that as an Israeli, I'm seeing my people struggling with. How do we respond to this horror when it doesn't feel like we have the support of the government? Which, can you imagine? And of course, some people, yes, no, but like the sense of betrayal. And the worse this gets, the worse the reactions from the world. And so this ancient voice of revenge. So let me tell you another story. My mother, Joan, whom some of you know and met, when she was in her early 20s, made Aliyah from England. In the wake of the Second World War and the Holocaust and the Jewish experience, she decided she wants to build her future in Israel. And she came in 1950 as a young idealist social worker. And her mother, Celine, my grandmother, who was of Belgian origin, gave her as a gift a book of Psalms, of Tehillim, old, leather-bound, with a beautiful inscription. Read this day, read a chapter every day, read it in joy, read it in sorrow. May there be more joy than sorrow. And it was on my mother's bookshelf. And when I came to New York in 97, she gave it to me and said, why don't you keep this for now? And eventually you can bring it back. So I've kept this and I've used this. That's at different moments in my life and my children's births and other big moments. And when I flew back 2 weeks ago and I tried to get a flight the moment October 7th happened and all the flights were canceled, I finally flew El Al and got there. And when I walked into her house, I said, I want you to keep this now. The least you can do is just read a psalm every day, like your mother asked you. And I recorded her reading one of the psalms so she can send that as a video to her 15 grandchildren who are in uniform on the border. That's 2 weeks ago. Not exactly sure where they are right now. And so she did. And she chose Psalm 121. Shir Lama'alot me'ayin yavo izri, a song of ascent. From where will my salvation come? Beautiful video. Went around with the whole family and people were like so touched. And she felt she can be helpful. And that psalm that I'm going to play at the end of tonight is really begging for protection. And it begins with the word Esainai le'arim, I look out to the mountains. From where will my salvation come? But there's another way of reading it. Not mountains, but ancestors. I look up to the ancestors. And it's not a question, from where will my salvation come? But it's a statement. from the void, my salvation come. From the space in between us, my salvation come. From what is the space between us, the air between us, the potential between us, the energy between us. That's where my salvation comes from. So last Friday night, a week ago, one of the many services I got to conduct was in a hotel, in a big room in a hotel in Tel Aviv, where there are families from Netiv HaAsara, one of the settlement, the Yishuvim, the Moshavim, on the Gaza border, who were badly butchered. And 20 people were killed from that particular community, and the rest were in 2 different hotels. Friday night before that, 2 weeks ago, I was with them in a hotel outside Tel Aviv. If you saw the little NPR bit I did, that was outside that hotel where one group of those survivors and refugees huddled. And the following, last Friday, I did the other group of that same moshav. And in this other group last week was my cousin Barak, who's 44 and has 4 sons and a wife who was born in that moshav. And her parents were there, and they were all there that day. And this was the first time last Friday night that I actually had sit down with someone I already know really well, known him since as a kid, and hear firsthand, blow by blow, from 6:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night, what it was like to be with 4 children inside a sealed room, while to the left and to the right of you, within feet, your neighbors are being massacred. And on the WhatsApp group of the people in your community, you're hearing their last words. And what it was like for him and his wife to decide at some point before it's dark to just get into their cars and drive no matter what, and probably save their lives. And what he describes of that ride, I will spare you. But the incongruousness of sitting with him that Friday night and hearing his story and hearing his little kids trying to process in some matter-of-fact way. When we sat and did the Kabbalat Shabbat with him that evening, we decided to sing this psalm, Psalm 121, Song of Ascent, Ancestors from the Void. And I had people just look into each other's eyes and say, you who are here, we who are here, this is where our salvation will come from each other, from the space of how we hold each other now. And we were all weeping. And when we asked them to say Hagomel, the blessing for life, for survival, which you say after a car accident or after giving birth, and we said, let's say it together. And we all said it together. And we asked them, what are you grateful for right now? And one woman said that one of my 2 sons is alive. And I thought of all the times that I've asked you on Shabbat or Yom Kippur morning, what are we grateful for? Modeh Ani. I'm grateful for the trees. To sit there and say, I'm grateful that one of my children is alive and that I'm alive. Last Friday night was the toughest I had. The proximity of the horror in the banality of being in a hotel dining room with walking zombies. And I will say, my sweet, sweet cousin Barak and his lovely children said to me, when he walked me out, he said, look, you know me. I'm not a crazy righty. I'm not a fundamentalist. He's not, he grew up religious. He's not. I don't know where we're going to live. I don't think we're going to go back there. I don't want my kids to live with guns protecting them. I don't know what my future is. Hundreds of thousands don't know their future. But what I want right now is I want to stop Hamas. And if what stopping Hamas means is grazing Gaza, I know it's not moral. I know it's not human. I know it's not strategic. I don't fucking care. What could I do but just hug him Just hug him. This is trauma, and we're not yet in the place of transcendence. Not everybody, not all the time. It will take a while to get there. We need to acknowledge this level of horror as well. While we want, talk about ceasefire in a moment, we want this to stop. Why it's not yet stopping? Because of the level of horror and rage. Psalm 121, one more story. The following day, Shabbat, I convened a circle for my queer family in Israel that really doesn't have a center. And people are really just all over the place. So this was the second heart circle for the fairies, for whatever queer community members wanted to come. We did one the previous Saturday outside Jerusalem in the park, in a forest, and now it was in a park in Tel Aviv. There were about 30 people. We sat in a circle and shared what's on our heart. What are we feeling? What have we experienced? What are our fears? What are our hopes? Beautiful, powerful circle. And then I said, all right, let's come together and let's pray. This is not a religious group in any way, but we all have something we need right now. And we're just going to play the song and throw into the mix what you need. And we did this prayer circle. And I asked David, one of the things, to play Psalm 121, which people know in Israel. It's very popular. Call to the ancestors, from where will my salvation come? The guardian will never sleep. As the sun rises, as the moon is full, you will be protected. And while we're singing it, and the sun is setting and the full moon is rising, while we're singing, we hear a siren. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, yes, yes. There's no shelter anywhere nearby, and the instruction is just lay on the floor and put your hands on your head. And so we said, okay, do that. But I said, guys, keep singing, keep praying. The odds that we're going to be hit here in the middle of the park are very low. And if we have a direct hit, then the fundamentalists are right. And that's probably not going to happen. So just keep singing. And it was weeping and laughing and singing at the same time. And while we were there, it was such a vantage point that we could see the rockets intercepted and hear two loud thuds not too far away. It turns out a house in South Tel Aviv was hit that night. But we kept on singing for another half hour and eventually sat up and just huddled. And none of us will forget that night, which is exactly a week ago. It feels like a decade. So the power of our ancient words and the tools we have at our disposals for agency. I want to highlight that as well. From the void, from each other, from the space where we meet. We will come out through this. The last thing I want to say from my storytelling, and then I really want to open it up. I want to say something about rage, and I want to say something about empathy. There is a lot of rage. There is a lot of rage. There's a lot of rage on social media. There's a lot of rage on the streets. There's anti-Semitic and there's anti-Islam, and there is the left on the right and the right on the left and the left in the left and the thing. The captive families are not united because some are saying we give the government full permission to get there, and the others are saying no, just get them out. And there are Israelis that are saying stop already, stop the bombing, it's not going anywhere, but they can't say it very loudly. And there are some that are saying get them, we won't stop nothing. And I know you're feeling and experiencing it the same here. There's very little permission to speak up on behalf of both and. And in Israel, especially for Israeli Arabs and for Palestinians, to say anything of empathy to the dead babies in Gaza is dangerous. It's a little different here, but also not. We're in the middle of a war where empathy with the enemy or even just commiseration is considered really problematic. And that is tragic, and we're not halfway through this tragedy yet. And so the rage and the lack of patience with each other's and nuance and the wording and the wordsmithing of can we or can we not say genocide? Can we or can we not say ceasefire, humanitarian pause? Can I say occupation? Can I say massive bombing? Can I say massacre? What do I say that is empathy and what do I say that is with mine but not with you? Like, I know you're all knowing this, including the tragedy of what's happening with the posters of the captives. And a lot of us are making mistakes and hurting each other in the middle of this when our intentions might be good, but rage and moving too fast, especially on social media, is causing additional harm. And I want to acknowledge, and I'll talk about this briefly now and want to address it on social media in the next week, but I too messed up by sending a message on a listserv that I've been on of social activists, too fast, too blunt, too angry about an opinion that I still think was deeply problematic, but doing more hurt than benefit. And got to the Times, a lot of people are mad, and it's simply because we need to slow down and contain some of the rage and take a deep breath and know that this is going to be big, bigger than any of us experienced. And we have to take the best tools we have at our disposal to not be sucked into this level of revenge and rage and hostility. Those of us who can. And that means, and that's my position, I'm not the only one, that we need to be in a place of compassion and empathy with the innocent lives on both sides. I was, I am, and I will be an advocate for a two-state solution if that's the best way out of the occupation. And my Palestinian friends with whom I've sat at heart circles these past 2 weeks, from East Jerusalem and from the West Bank, not from Gaza at this point, 2 in person, 1 on Zoom, and then 1 more meeting of activists in Givat Chaviva. The brave ones who show up are showing up in empathy, showing up in commiseration, showing up with courage and with commitment to continued dialogue. It is not the majority, but it's on us to expand and enlarge these circles of courage and care. The Sulha organization that I shared about and I'm part of, and I'll keep on sharing. We're going to start doing monthly Zoom circles online for you all to join. The project in Givat Chaviva that brings together Arabs and Jews to de-escalate violence and create educational structures for the future, where we are intertwined in each other's fate and not in either or, is the only way out of here. And right now it seems ridiculously far. But once we start rebuilding, and we will, that is the only way. Because we're at a place where the children of Abraham are killing each other in ways we always knew would come. And the disastrous attitude of the Israeli government the last 20 years, and the growing violence and fundamentalism in the Islamic and Jewish sectors just grows and grows and grows. But there's so many who are not that way. My older brother Benny was just with a sheikh, a Bedouin sheikh in the Negev in the south, talking together, hugging together, creating a headquarters together for support for the Bedouin community. I'm going to send that video up tomorrow. It just happened on Friday. Empathy with both. And so the last thing I want to say about that is I'll share the story with you from this last Tuesday. I got on the plane, honestly very reluctant to leave and come back here. And as I'm getting on the plane and the plane is about to take off, I get a phone call from my brother. my older brother Shai, who never calls me. We WhatsApp or text, but like I don't remember the last time he called me. And I can't pick up because by the time I saw the call, the plane was literally taking off. Now, the last thing I saw in the news headline that, of course, you scan every 5 minutes, is that there were 2 soldiers killed in Gaza, where 15 of my nephews are, or somewhere in the fighting, and there were several hundred Palestinians killed that morning, and they're still counting. I'm looking at Al Jazeera, and I'm looking at BBC, and I'm looking at Haaretz, and constantly comparing data. And then my brother calls me, and I can't pick up the phone, and the plane is taking off, and I went into a cold sweat, thinking he's probably called me because who is it? Get me off this plane. All I'm thinking is like, get me off this plane. I need to fly right back. It's the worst. And then I did what I don't usually do because my father taught us to be frugal, but I paid for internet on the flight right away. And I'm like, Abba, you will understand. It's okay. And I got in touch with my brother who said, oh, I wanted to let you know that your nephew got engaged. He was on a 24-hour leave. And they got engaged. Then he's going to go back. They're 24. Okay, that was worth the Wi-Fi. And but then I sat there, and many of you were with me on Yom Kippur Eve. We talked about ever-presence and expanding our circles of compassion, and we talked about the 50 years since the Yom Kippur War, and the story of Leonard Cohen, who dropped everything to go volunteer for the Israeli soldiers in the Suez. And while he's playing there and he's feeling he's part of the Jewish nation, solidarity with the Jewish people, he's seeing a helicopter full of wounded soldiers. And they tell him, and he's like heartbroken, all these soldiers. And then someone says, it's Egyptian soldiers. And for a moment, he feels relief. And as he writes in his journal, that moment when he felt relief that the Egyptian and not Israelis haunted him. He felt guilty as a human, as a humanist, that he felt relief that those wounded boys are not Israelis. And he would go on to be the humanitarian, universalist, Jewish sage that he is, and teach us about expanding a sense of empathy and noticing where we can be larger with our love. And at the same time, for those 20 minutes on the plane, all I could think about was my nephews, not the hundreds of children and innocents in Gaza. There's a way in which family matters. It's where we come from. There is kin, there's tribe. We are biologically built. And we are people from so many different paths and so many traumas. And yet what's being asked of us right now, which is so difficult for the universalist global reality we're living in the United States, with our affinities, with so many different people of different worlds, with the people we're married to who are Jewish or not, who might be Zionist or anti-Zionist, with our colleagues, with our collaborators of different ways, to be simultaneously with our people, with our people's pain, with our people's fuck-ups, with our people's hope, with our family story, and know that it's a bigger family. And that is the moral challenge of this moment. Us who refuse to be in either or positions, which is what we come from. That's the biblical story we inherited. That's the Isaac versus Ishmael, the Cain versus Abel, the patriarchal binary is all we know because that's where we come from. But we've always had the other way as well, the oral Torah, the imaginative Torah, the both and Torah, the permission to retell. The whole story of storytelling is to talk back to the text. We don't have to let that text be the only source of trauma that we hold on to. It is just a jumping off point. It's what we got from our ancestors. They did the best they could, but that's not what's going to get us to the next chapter of feminism and queer rights and human rights. And yes, peace in the Middle East. There's room for Israelis to live in peace and dignity and security, and for Palestinians to do the same. It's going to require compromise. It's going to require a lot of trust in rebuilding. But when I sat on that plane reading about grief and reading about the prophet Ezekiel and the beginning of the Babylon, Jerusalem, two different centers, and thinking, how the hell do I get back to the United States where my friends on the left already canceling me and my friends on the right already canceling me, because I'm either not standing just with Israel or I'm not standing just with Palestine, and I'm daring to say I grieve for both and I want both to succeed. And the fact that we're living in a moment where our language can't even handle that, this is our moral challenge to find the space of empathy, find within us the ability to love our family and the largest sense of family. Might be too soon. Bombs are still falling, still burying our dead. Shloshim, the 30th, is tonight. It's been a month. For some of us, the longest and most confusing month of our lives. And we don't know what's coming up ahead. So I want to end this sharing that, as you can tell, has a lot of different things and certainly doesn't hold it all, with a very short piece of a poem by a Palestinian-American poem many of us have heard before and loved, Naomi Shinab-Nye. Also put it in the chat. And then we're going to listen to a song and then take some questions with a deep breath and a lot of empathy for each other, patience. But here's the bit of the poem by Naomi. It starts off with a quote. Let's be the same wound if we must bleed. Let's fight side by side, even if the enemy is ourselves. I am yours, you are mine. Tommy Olofsson, Sweden. Naomi Shinab-Nye says, I'm not interested in who suffered the most. I'm interested in people getting over it. Each carries a tender spot, something our lives forgot to give us. A man builds a house and says, I am native now. A woman speaks to a tree in place of her son, and olives come. A child's poem says, I don't like wars. They end up with monuments, just painting a bird with wings wide enough to cover two roofs at once. This is a poem called Jerusalem. And I'll be sharing it in one of the upcoming mailers and notes. So I'm going to invite us to take a couple more breaths, please, with me. Maybe even close your eyes for a moment. I shared a lot of images with you, a lot of stories. These are just a few of my unpacked bags.